Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to the coast this time,
To the coast.
to the Cape Cod.
Ah, okay.
But it's definitely not going to be a peaceful little visit to the beach.
Oh.
We're going to be diving into the murder of Krista Worthington.
Oh, wow.
And this case really shook this small town of Truro, Massachusetts.
Yeah, a case like this really kind of, makes you think about how safe a community really is. I mean, this town, Truro, hadn't had a murder in 30 years.
Yeah, that's what I read.
Before this one.
30 years.
So, yeah, you can imagine what this did to the town.
Absolutely.
It really shook things up.
Yeah, and our main source for this deep dive is going to be the 48 Hours Murder on the Cape episode.
Oh, okay.
Which has interviews with all the key people.
Gotcha.
So it should be pretty interesting.
Sounds like it.
And, Krista Worthington was a fashion writer.
Oh, wow.
She had kind of traded in the runways of Paris and Milan for this quiet life on the Cape.
Interesting.
It makes you think.
It does. Like, why would she?
Yeah, what was she looking for there? Exactly. So let's start there.
Okay.
Like, what was Krista like,
Yeah.
What was she seeking?
What brought her to Truro?
Yeah, in this little quaint seaside town.
Well, it seems like, based on what I read, that she just wanted a simpler life, a place where she could raise her daughter, Ava, just kind of get away from everything.
She had a daughter.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Named Ava, and she was really devoted to her. It seems like that's, being a mom was really important to her.
So we have this kind of picture of her, wanting this peaceful existence.
Right.
But then in January 2002, that just totally gets shattered.
Yeah.
Tell me about the discovery of her body.
Oh, it's chilling.
What was the scene like?
Her former boyfriend, Tim Arnold,
Okay.
went to her house and he found her body on the floor.
Oh, my gosh.
But the worst part, the really heartbreaking detail, is that her 2-year-old daughter, Ava, was right there next to her, trying to nurse from her mom,
Oh, my God.
who had already passed away.
Oh, man. That's just devastating.
It is.
That image is just so sad.
Yeah, it is.
And, of course, that makes Tim Arnold a suspect.
Right? Well, yeah, I mean, he's the one who found her.
Right.
And their relationship, it seems like it was complicated. They had broken up, but he was still in her life and around Ava.
I see.
A lot of unresolved feelings, it seems like.
So we have Tim Arnold.
Yeah.
But the 48 Hours episode also points to another key figure in all of this.
Okay.
Tony Jacket.
Right.
Ava's father.
Right.
He and Krista also had a pretty tumultuous relationship from what I read.
Yeah, very much so. It was complicated, to say the least.
In what way?
Well, they had an affair, which put a lot of strain on his marriage.
Okay.
Then they had a custody battle going on over Ava.
Wow.
And there were demands for child support. It sounds like things were really messy between them.
So both Tim Arnold and Tony Jacket,
Yeah.
they both had connections to Krista and potential motives,
Absolutely.
which I guess, puts them in the spotlight
Of course.
at the beginning of the investigation.
Right.
But this case took a very unexpected turn.
It did.
Didn't it?
Yeah, this is where that DNA dragnet comes in.
Oh, yeah.
So the police were under a lot of pressure to solve this case.
Of course, high profile.
Absolutely. And so they did something pretty unprecedented.
Okay.
They collected DNA samples from almost every man in Truro.
Wow.
I mean, that's a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine what that must have been like for the people living there?
I can't even imagine.
Like everyone's a suspect suddenly?
Right. Like you can't trust anyone.
This quiet, tight-knit community.
Right.
And suddenly it's just got all this suspicion and anxiety.
Yeah, like a wave of just, uncertainty.
And this dragnet went on for years.
Years.
And they didn't find any matches.
Nope.
For years.
Nothing.
Until 3.5 years after the murder.
Crazy, right?
And they get a hit.
They do.
Who does the DNA lead them to?
Christopher McCowan.
Who's that?
Krista's garbage man.
What?
Yeah.
So you have these two guys, right? Tim Arnold, Tony Jacket. They're obviously connected to Krista. And then the DNA points to someone who seems totally unconnected.
It's like a left turn.
Right.
Out of nowhere.
It feels like the investigation just went down a totally different path.
Completely different path.
Yeah. So let's unpack that.
Okay.
What does the prosecution present as their case against this Christopher McCowan?
Well, they really honed in on two main pieces of evidence.
Okay.
So first they have the DNA that they found on Krista's body,
Right.
which they say, without a doubt, links McCowan to the scene.
Makes sense.
And then second, they have this alleged confession from McCowan himself,
Okay.
where he admits to beating Krista.
So DNA and a confession?
Right.
That sounds pretty bad.
Yeah.
So what's their theory? What do they think happened that night?
Okay, so they're saying it was a rage-fueled attack.
Okay.
They think that McCowan, maybe he made a sexual advance that was rejected,
Oh,
and he just lashed out at Krista
wow.
violently. But the defense, they had a totally different take on everything.
Oh, really? So what was their side of the story? Like, what did they say?
Well, they basically tried to make everyone question if the DNA evidence and the confession were actually reliable.
Okay.
They said, yeah, okay, maybe the DNA puts McCowan at the scene,
Right.
but that doesn't mean he's the one who killed her.
I see.
Like maybe the DNA just means they had, a consensual encounter,
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
but not that he murdered her.
Okay, so they're saying the DNA doesn't necessarily mean murder.
Exactly. And then with the confession, they brought up McCowan's IQ,
Oh, okay.
which was pretty low. And they said that made him really vulnerable, during the interrogation.
Oh, so like maybe he was pressured
Exactly.
into confessing.
Yeah, they said he was basically pressured into admitting to something he didn't do.
Wow, that's a serious accusation.
It is. And they also said that the whole investigation was mishandled.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they said the crime scene was contaminated and that evidence wasn't handled properly, which, could have messed up the whole case against him.
So basically the defense was trying to poke holes in every part of the prosecution's case.
Yeah, exactly.
This trial sounds like it was a real battle. Like both sides had their own story.
It definitely was a battle of narratives.
Yeah. Were there any other big moments during the trial that you remember, like any important testimonies?
Well, there was this guy, Jeremy Fraser, a friend of McCowan's.
Okay.
He was actually implicated at first, but then they cleared him.
Oh, wow.
But even though he wasn't really involved, it still added another layer to everything.
Yeah, I can imagine having all these different people and their relationships.
Right?
And then conflicting stories on top of that and questions about the evidence.
It's a lot to keep track of.
Yeah, must have been hard for the jury to sort through everything.
Absolutely. And then to make things even more complicated, one of the jurors was dismissed.
Oh, wow. What happened?
It was during the deliberations.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it was pretty controversial.
I bet.
It just raised more questions about, was there bias?
Right.
And it made everything even more dramatic.
Yeah, this definitely wasn't an open and shut case.
Nope, it was messy.
So in the end, what happened? Did the jury believe the defense?
They didn't. In the end, they found McCowan guilty.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What was the reaction to that?
It was a shock to the community.
Yeah.
But it didn't really, put everything to rest.
Oh, so even with the guilty verdict, people still weren't sure.
Yeah, there were still questions and this kind of feeling that things are unresolved.
So what happened to McCowan?
Well, he was sentenced to life in prison,
Wow.
but he still says he's innocent.
Really?
Yeah, and his lawyers are still fighting to get him released.
So even with the conviction, it doesn't seem like there was any real closure.
No, not really. And that's what's so interesting about this whole case.
What do you mean?
Well, there were allegations of racial bias during the jury deliberations.
Oh, wow.
And you have McCowan saying he didn't do it, and his lawyers are still working on his case.
Yeah.
So there's this feeling of unease that just kind of hangs over everything.
It sounds like this case is about way more than just finding out who killed Krista.
It is.
It makes you think about, justice and how we remember things and how trauma affects people and whole communities.
Yeah, and the 48 Hours episode really focused on how this whole thing affected everyone involved.
Like,
Well, you have Tony Jackett and Tim Arnold.
right.
They both had complicated relationships with Krista,
Yeah, we talked about that.
and they're both trying to deal with what happened.
I can't even imagine.
And then you have her friends and family. They're grieving and still trying to figure out what happened.
Right.
And then there's Ava.
Oh my gosh, yeah, Ava.
It's just heartbreaking.
She was so little.
I know, and she lost her mom in such a horrible way.
Yeah.
And now she has to grow up without her.
I mean, she was really young when it happened, but I bet she's still affected by it.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure she'll never forget that night.
It's crazy how violence can affect so many people.
It's a ripple effect.
It is. And what about Truro itself?
Yeah.
How did all of this affect the town?
Well, I mean, this was a place known for being peaceful and quiet.
Right.
And then this happens.
Yeah.
Their sense of security was just totally shattered.
Yeah.
For years, they lived knowing that someone who killed someone was living among them.
Oh my gosh.
And even though they made an arrest and had the trial,
Right.
it still exposed how vulnerable they were.
Yeah.
And it made people talk about prejudice and social divisions in the town.
This case really does seem to reflect bigger issues in society.
It does.
Like, it makes you think about how class and race and just how people see each other
Yeah.
can affect how justice is served.
Right.
And it shows how even in a place that seems perfect,
Like a small town.
yeah, there can be darkness hidden underneath.
Absolutely. This case is definitely one that makes you think.
It does. It really makes you think about people and how complicated we are and
Yeah.
how fragile life is and how hard it can be to find the truth.
And to get justice. Yeah, and it makes you wonder if a community can ever really heal after something like this.
Yeah, I mean, is it really over for them, even though there was a conviction?
Right. Like, how do you move on when there's still so many unanswered questions?
Yeah, and some people still think that McCowan might be innocent.
Exactly. And how do you reconcile that with the fact that a jury found him guilty?
Seems like this whole thing will always be hanging over the town.
Yeah, it's like this permanent reminder of what happened.
The scar.
Yeah, and not just a reminder of the murder, but also of all the questions about how they tried to find justice. Yeah.
And this case brings up even bigger questions too, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
About our whole legal system.
Absolutely. Like, how much do we trust DNA evidence? Can people be forced to confess? Are juries really fair?
Right. All those things came up in this case.
They did. And those are issues that are important in so many other cases, too.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening.
It has.
We've uncovered so much about this Krista Worthington case.
I mean, we started with the murder, and then
Yeah.
we went through this crazy trial. And even now, there's still all these questions.
Yeah, it's like every layer we peeled back just revealed something even more complicated.
And it really makes you think about the evidence and how everyone had their own story and how much this crime affected everyone.
It does. So as we wrap up this case, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about.
Okay.
Imagine you're back in Truro in 2002,
Okay.
and this horrible crime happens, and it just shatters the peace of this small town.
Right.
Years go by, and then finally they arrest someone, they have the trial, and they get a verdict.
But do you think that really brings closure?
Yeah, I mean, is that the end of the story, or does it just create more unease, more fear that never really goes away?
That's a great question.
What do you guys think what happened that night in Truro? What really stuck with you about this case?
Yeah, let us know your thoughts, share your theories with us online using hashtag #TheDeepDiveCapeCod.
And if you're enjoying these deep dives, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes.
We're always digging into the most interesting stories and topics.
Trying to find the truth and understand what's really going on.
So keep those brains working and keep talking about these things with each other.
Until next time.